operations team, and basically one of our main goals is to help developers have an easier life. And so today I'm going to attempt to help you in another form than my usual form, which is usually going to hackathons and helping developers code. Today I'm going to talk about personal productivity. It's something that's near and dear to my heart because when I was in school, and I was going to school full time, I was also working, trying to start a business, and also trying to raise a family. So very quickly I learned that time management was very important. Otherwise I was going to go crazy and I was never going to sleep again. So I spent a lot of time studying and learning about time management techniques and productivity. And today I'm going to teach you some of the things I've learned over the past few years, some of the things that's worked for me. But one of the things I wanted to make sure that you all understood is that there's no system that works for everyone, right? What I'm going to do is give you the tools that's worked for me, and then some tools that's worked for friends of mine, and then people out in the field. What I would like you to do is to pick and choose those tools that you think would work for you and test them out. Think of it as going through an agile sprint. You know, give it 2 weeks. After 2 weeks, do a retrospection and see how it works for you. So let's get started. So here's the goal, right? We're all trying to get to that Zen state of peace and relaxation, get into the flow. But we find that it's very difficult. Why? Because everyone's always sending us information, whether it's through email, whether it's through phone, text messages. All of these things are constantly bombarding us. But my hope is by the time I finish talking with you, you will all be levitating. Or maybe I might not be able to do that, but maybe give you a little bit more peace of mind. So, a quick summary about what I'm going to talk about today. First, I'm going to go into frameworks. So frameworks to me is like a strategy, like an overall strategy of how to be productive. Then I'm going to go into techniques. These are specific things that you do within those strategies in order to be most productive. Then I'm going to go into tools, some of my favorite tools that I use on a day-to-day basis in order to be really productive. And then finally, I'm going to leave you with some references in case you want to continue more with your study of this topic. So the first framework that I came across that kind of hit me was from our friend Tony Robbins. He can be a little bit loud at times, but he's got some really cool ideas and some good messages. And the first framework that I found was RPM. So it stands for Results, Purpose, and Massive Action. So the main idea is any kind of project or task that you're going to do, you need to have a specific result that you can measure. For example, if my goal is to lose weight, I should say, by November 1st, I want to lose 10 pounds. That's very specific. I can measure it. I can hold myself accountable. Now, if I just said, I want to be in great shape, how do I measure that, right? It's just a dream at that point. But if you want something to actually be done, then you have to take the time to figure out how to measure it. Now, this is a big one. When you jump out of bed in the morning, are you excited? Are you looking forward to your job? Are you looking forward to whatever project that you're working on? If not, a lot of times it's because you haven't spent enough time thinking about the purpose. For many people, the purpose is a paycheck. You want to get paid and take care of your family or your friends. But other times, it's a greater purpose. Maybe you want to change the world. Maybe you're a crazy entrepreneur and you want to start the next big business. Whatever that purpose is, it makes a lot of sense to spend the time to define it and make sure that you're motivating yourself. Because otherwise, it may be that project you're working on, maybe it's time to get rid of it. Finally, you create the massive action plan with the specific actions. Here's the problem that I see over and over again. Most people start at the bottom. They start with the actions. They think of a project and they just start writing about all these things that they need to do on their to-do list. But I propose that if you don't start with looking at what's the specific and measurable result and the motivation, then you're going to end up with a bunch of actions that may not even lead you to the right result. So remember, the actions are easily changeable because you can have multiple paths to whatever your goal is. But the result should be very static and defined. Now this framework came along a little bit later, and really it's become the cornerstone of most of what I do now, mainly because it's a very interrupt-driven type of system. It's designed for people who have a lot of stuff to do. And I can imagine, since you all are developers here, you probably have a lot of stuff to do, whether it's stuff on your project that you're working for a client or some new project that you're working on. And what this system aims to do is to get all that stuff out of your mind so that you can get into a state of flow and be creative, which is really what, as developers, part of what we are is art along with the science. And for any kind of art endeavor, you need focused time. So the main elements of GTD, first one is a project. Now, this concept is very important because most of us have projects on our to-do list that we don't really define as projects. Like, for example, you may have on your to-do list that I need to give a quarterly report to Bob, say. That's not a task. That is a project. A project is anything that takes more than 2 steps. And the reason why that's important is because a task is something that you should be able just to complete in one shot. But doing a report may mean that I need to go onto the web and do some research, collect some numbers. I may need to call some coworkers and get some information. There's a lot of things that may go into getting that project complete. Next actions, this is one of the things that's helped me the most within this system. This concept of defining each task on your list as if you were going to outsource it to someone. It may feel real silly to do that at first because you're like, this is my list, I know what's on my list, I know what to do. The problem is if you write something down today and you look at it 2 weeks from now, are you going to remember what it was that you were supposed to do? The other benefit that you get from writing down your action as if you were going to outsource it is that you can outsource it later. If you end up having a team or you have people you could delegate to, you've already written your tasks in a way that it can be completed by someone other than yourself. Context is also very important. For example, I have a huge to-do list of things to do, but I would venture to say that right now I can't do many of them. I can only speak to you at this moment. And so the way that plays out in real life is, say for example, I have 10 phone calls I have to make on my list. And then say on that same list, I have 10 items I need to be sitting in front of my computer. Well, if I'm sitting in a car waiting for someone, that's a perfect time to take out my list and just do the things that I could do making a phone call. And why that helps is because most of us, when we see a huge list of things to do, it's a paralyzing effect. You look at this gigantic list and it's, whoa, where do I even start? So one of the things that David Allen suggests is that you take all of your actions and assign a context to it. So that way when you're in that context, you can actually do it. I also propose that you add 2 other dimensions. One dimension is time. For example, say you're waiting in line and you have 15 minutes left. It'd be really cool if you had a list that showed all the things you can do that took less than 15 minutes that you could do while you're standing in line. That will definitely up your productivity game. The other thing is energy. There are some things that you just can't do first thing in the morning, or that you can't do late at night, that you need to be doing at a certain energy time. So it's very important to make sure that you define those dimensions in order to better optimize your to-do lists. Now this is what a GTD workflow looks like. I'm going to go through it very quickly here because I don't have that much time. But basically the idea is that you're collecting stuff constantly. Stuff is people handing you a piece of paper. It could be email. It could be phone call. It could be someone verbally telling you something. The idea is that you should have a trusted place to put all of your stuff so that you know that there's not random things laying around. Like, for example, a Post-it somewhere that has a very critical thing you're supposed to do. So the idea is you collect all of this stuff. And then once you collect it, now you have to process it. So you ask the question, what is it? Is it actionable? If it's actionable, if it takes less than 2 minutes, just do it. Because there's no sense of having a huge list of all of these different items that just take a few minutes to do. So the rule of thumb is about 2 minutes. If it takes about 2 minutes, just do it. Also, this is probably one of the most important things to know, is the trash can. There's a lot of stuff that comes to us every day that just doesn't deserve to be in our list. And you should not feel too bad about putting stuff in the trash. That's probably one of the most important things you can learn to do. That and saying no to things. If it's something that you want to do, but you don't have time, like me wanting to learn Spanish fluently, you put it in your someday maybe list so that you can work on it at a future time. Then there's references. So right now I'm using Evernote for my reference files, but everyone should have some sort of reference system to collect all of that information that you collect throughout your life. Then Once you determine that it's actionable and you determine what the next action is, then if it takes more than 2 things, it becomes a project. And in another slide, I'm going to discuss how we break down projects. And it's really important. Hopefully it'll help you with some of your projects that may be stuck. Then you decide whether or not if you're not going to do it right now, say it's a thing that takes 15 minutes, you're either going to delegate it to someone or you're going to defer it. Now delegate, always remember, delegate but don't abdicate, meaning that you need to have a waiting for list that tracks all the things that you've delegated, and you should check that list at least once a day. And then you can determine whether or not that item on your waiting list actually now needs to be a phone call to that person because it's been 5 days since they've responded to you. If you can't delegate it, then you put it in one of your action lists where I talked about earlier how you separate them out by context. If it's something that's physical, like for me being here today, it goes on my calendar. And some people use their calendars to plan out their whole week. They'll take all of their tasks and they'll put each task into each day. To me, that seems a little bit overwhelming, and I can't operate that way, but for some people that works well. But what I suggest is that you use the calendar as your sacred area of physical places where you need to be. That way, if you're looking at your calendar, you know that everything on here has to be done at this particular time. And then everything else on your lists are basically items that have to be done as soon as possible. Now, I told you that I was going to tell you about the planning technique. So I showed you earlier the RPM method, which I really like from Tony Robbins, but I like the natural planning technique even better because it goes a couple steps further. And usually if I have a project that's going to take any more than a few hours, I'll run through this process. And so I would recommend is that you use something like this as a template for each new project that comes in to your life. So first, the purpose, the guiding principles. Why are we doing this? So you notice before we talked about the results. Here, he's saying, well, if you don't even have a purpose to start with, why even think about the results? It may be that this is not your project. It means you need to give this project to somebody else. So think about first, purpose. Why do you need this project to be complete? Then, define what it looks like to have success. If you have a client project, one way to do that is through the contract that you have with your customer. If it's your personal project, it could be an MVP that you've defined. But make it really clear, what does it mean when this project is over and when it's successful? Otherwise, you have these everlasting projects that seem to never end, and those are really stressful. So you want to make sure that your project actually has a defined end. Now, I know that kind of contradicts the idea of agile and rapid iterations, but what I'm saying is define each iteration. So you may say that the successful outcome of the next 2 weeks is this particular thing. Then after that outcome has been made, then you can make an additional iteration. Brainstorming. So the biggest thing about brainstorming that I want to relate to you is that you always have to try to just empty your mind and not let your developer thinking hat come into play. You kind of have to release yourself and just kind of think about things outside of the box. Because a lot of us, when we start brainstorming, we already start planning out the project, we start putting in all the details, but that's not the purpose here. The brainstorming purpose is to kind of tap into the universe, if you will, and gather in all the ideas that you can, whether or not that you're going to use them or not. It's a very good practice in any kind of project that you're doing. Then, if you like, if it's a project involving other people, you can extend that brainstorm to other people on your team. Finally, you organize all of the items. So once you've defined all of these things, now we need to timeline it out and say, okay, by Friday, this task needs to be done, and by this person. So very specific goals and very specific things. And then finally, defining the actions themselves. As I said before, defining actions means defining it in a way that if I give this action to you and you have no idea about this project, that you can actually complete it. So the thing that derails most people, including myself, I struggle with this aspect all the time, is the weekly review. The weekly review is what ties it all together. And we all know this from things like Agile, right? That retrospective is key. It's very important in order for you to improve. Also, if you don't take the time to do your weekly review, just like any other system, it starts to go crazy. You start to have way too many items on your list, things that are not relevant, and then it just slows you down. So first thing you do in the weekly reviews, you take all those captured things, all those little bits of paper, all those voicemails that you missed, and make sure that you dump them into your system. Make sure there's no loose ends. Then you review all your projects and your next actions. Make sure this project should be on your list. The way I think about it is, for the upcoming week, I only want projects in there that I realistically know that I'll be able to have time to work on. Otherwise, it's useless to have it there. It's just going to take up mental cycles and it's going to waste time. Then you want to review your calendar. I like to look back a month, sometimes 2 weeks, and then look forward 2 or 3 months. Because there may be a big event that you have 2 months from now that you better start preparing for now. So it's a good idea to always check your calendar both in reverse for items you may have missed, and then also in the future for items that are coming up. Then later I'm going to talk about the power of checklists. But one thing you want to make sure you do is review those checklists to make sure that they're still relevant to your work today. And then finally, you review those someday maybe lists. Now this is a thing that I have a little bit of a trouble with, mainly because I have way too many things on the someday maybe list and it's kind of depressing. I have all these things and dreams that I want to do, and I don't want to really look at them every week just to show how much I'm behind. So I say review those about once a month to keep your sanity. The idea is to look at those things and see, is there anything on there that I could pull out and put into my day-to-day routine? Like, for example, myself learning Spanish. So then, a lot of people get stuck on the day-to-day, right? You have a lot of stuff going on. And you have deadlines and all these things. But it's very important to take a step back and look at the higher levels. I recommend that you do this in a place where you could be alone and that nobody's going to bother you for several hours. I personally like to go hiking and go up to a mountain somewhere where I don't even have internet connection and just bring a paper and pen and then dive into these questions. So the questions are, what are the areas of responsibility in your life? You know, are you a husband or wife? Are you a boss? Are you a business owner? Are you a brother, friend? What are all the areas in your life that are important to you? It's important to define what those are so then later you can define your goals within each one of those. Then you want to take a step back and look at the 1 to 2 year picture. You know, in the end of 2 years, where do I see myself today? These are very hard questions and they take a lot of reflection because most of us are not thinking that far in advance. But then you go to 3 to 5 year vision. I recommend that you forget the 10, 15, 20. I think that's too unrealistic for most of us. I think most of us can kind of envision 5 years from now. So I recommend that you go up to 5 years, but then finally spend some time thinking about why are we here? You know, why are you on this planet? What is your purpose in life? Some of my favorite mentors have told me that you find that out right when you're about to die. I hope that's not true. If a life purpose, even if it's temporary, it'll do wonders for your motivation and your productivity. It's a question that spend an hour a month thinking about it, and it'll make some difference in your life. One of the frameworks that was intriguing to me, he was our VP of engineering at one point. He told me that he did Agile in his personal life with his family. It was intriguing to me as a developer. I'm used to Agile and development teams. So I asked him, are you doing scrums every day with your family? And he's like, yes, and actually it's pretty fantastic. So I wanted to learn more. And I found out that this guy made this system called Getting Results the Agile Way. And if you just Google that, and he actually gives away the system for free. There's a version that you can buy. But basically, the takeaways is that you look at what are the 3 outcomes for you that you want to finish in a year. That's a very powerful question. Many of us never think about something like that. Like at the end of the year, if you did these 3 things, what would make you feel awesome about yourself? Problem is, usually those 3 things are for somebody else. It's for whoever we're working for. It may be for a spouse. It may be for friends. But think about for you, what are the 3 outcomes you would like to complete? Then break that down to the month. So what 3 things can I do in October in order to make sure that those 3 things I want to do for the year actually come true? Then you break it down for the week. You sit down and you think about, okay, during this week, what are the 3 things that can then bubble up to help me do the 3 things for the month and then the 3 things to the year. And then finally for the day. I think it was Charles Schwab was the one who used to walk around with an index card with 1 thing written on it per day. And his goal was to just complete the 1 thing and then his day would be good. And so I proposed 3 things. Most of us can choose at least 3 things that they can do to make the day worthwhile. So one of the things I really like about this system is this idea of work-life balance. I mean, for myself, I'm always feeling like I'm working entirely too much and that the rest of my life is suffering for it. So I've been struggling with this area for a while now, and I like the way that they approach it. They have this concept of hotspots, so you define different areas of your life that are important to you, like it may be career, family, health, and personal growth, for example. Then, for each one of those, you define what's the minimum I'm willing to do in order to move that hotspot forward. Like, so for health, I may say, I must work out 3 hours a week, otherwise I've failed. And so you'll create those minimums for each one of those. For family, it may be, I'm going to spend an hour of undivided attention talking with my family a day at the bare minimum. So the idea is to make sure that you define those so that you, no matter what happens, you'll have some sort of balance. And so this is what it looks like. They have these downloadable templates that you can use. And basically the idea is you define your hotspots. On the Monday of the week, you define the 3 things that you want to complete for the week. You do that daily. And then finally, the Friday reflection. So the Friday reflection, you can think of it as your retrospective, as if you were doing regular Agile. You look at it and you say, what 3 things worked this week really well? Or what 3 things do I need to improve on? Then you take those things and you iterate your system. So the idea is that this is not a static system. This system is supposed to evolve over time for your particular cases. So if I told you how I did it, it's not going to work for you. This is something that you have to personalize for yourself. One of the more recent ones that I saw that was intriguing to me was this 18-minute idea. I think I found it on a blog in the Harvard Business Review. And basically, his idea is that you spend 5 minutes of the day planning in the morning. I typically like to do that the night before, but I think there's something about letting your mind think about things as you're sleeping. But then, here's the key of the system, is that every minute you have like maybe a little alarm or timer or whatever, and then whenever that timer rings, you look back at those things that you were supposed to focus on and think about, is what I'm doing right now moving me towards completing those things? To me, that's a little bit obsessive. I don't know if I want to be reminded every minute how I'm procrastinating. But for some people, if you have a very important task, for example, that might be one way to make sure that you stay focused. And then finally, at the end, you do a 5-minute review and look at how your focus was throughout the day and think about how you can get better. Sometimes it's a matter of moving to another office. Sometimes it's a matter of shifting your work hours. But the idea is finding out where's that time that you can focus. So now I'm going to move on to techniques. One of my favorite ones for developers is the Pomodoro technique, especially because for me it's very hard to focus on things, especially at the office, because there are a lot of distractions. Even just opening my computer is a bunch of distractions. So if I need to work on a specific problem, I will break it down into a few Pomodoros. So Pomodoro is Italian for tomato, and basically the idea is that you have this tomato timer. And this tomato timer, you set it in increments of 25 minutes, and then what happens is it ticks down until 25 minutes have ended, and then you take a break for 5 minutes. The ticking sound is very important because it's a psychological thing. The idea is that you're training your mind to be focused during that time, so that when you start hearing that ticking noise, your mind knows, okay, it's time to focus. It's kind of like when you're in school and maybe you went to the library to study. When you sat down in that library and you got in that peaceful, quiet environment, all of a sudden your mind tuned in to studying. So it's the same concept here. So the idea is that you figure out how many Pomodoros that you need to complete your tasks, and then you record them in a sheet, which I'll show you at the end. You take your short break for 5 minutes, and then every 4 Pomodoros you take a 15 to 20 minute break. And that's when you could do things like check your emails, see if your coworkers are still alive, things like that. But the 5 minute break, I recommend to not do that. That 5 minute break is very important for you just to let your mind calm for a minute. That's not the time for you to do the email checking. And that's what it looks like. You have a simple sheet, you put in your Pomodoros there, and you mark them off as you go through. Very simple technique, but very powerful for those that need to focus. And also, if you put one of those timers on your desk, people will start to learn not to mess with you when you're in the Pomodoro. And then you can throw it at them if they bother you. The digital truth dashboard, this is another thing. So being a consultant prior to SendGrid, there was a lot of clients that I had, and a lot of them use different systems. The problem with that is that becomes very stressful because then you're checking 5 or 6 systems throughout the day, and then it's very hard to figure out how to prioritize them all. So I'm a big fan of dashboards. One dashboard to rule all dashboards. So the idea is that whatever systems that you have, try and collect them all into one single place that you can look at it in one day. And also, it's a central point for all your stuff. What I recommend is that everyone should have their own personal wiki, because all of you are learning amazing things every day. And the problem is we just usually just it floats away. Or maybe we bookmark it or something like that. What I propose is make yourself a wiki. Like, for example, say you need to learn a little bit about SEO. Why not have a page of specific ideas that you know have worked and that have been shown to work from your friends on that page, so that when next time in the future you need to do something in that area, you've already got it taken care of. Also, the thing to consider about a dashboard is how you're going to access it. Think about, do you live on your phone? Do you live on your tablet? Do you live on your computer? So take those things into consideration when choosing the tool. For example, one of my favorite tools for creating these things is Google Apps. Problem with Google Apps is that, at least when I was using it, you could not edit it from your phone. And since I'm mostly living from my phone, that's no good. So think about where you're going to use it and how your particular lifestyle works. And if possible, you want to automate this. So for example, Basecamp is a system that we use, right? And you can either use their API or you can use RSS feeds. But either way, you can pull that into your dashboard, so I don't have to actually go log in specifically to Basecamp to see what task that I have doing there. And that way, I can compare that with other tasks from other systems like Asana, for example. Uh-oh. I think I've lost my connection here. All right. So, the zone. We all hear about the zone. Athletes talk about it. Developers talk about it. One of my goals is to make sure that you can get to the zone more often. Of course, not the twilight zone, but the zone where you're really productive. And so some of the techniques is hideouts. For example, when I was in school, there was a science library where I'd go up to the top floor and hide in a corner. It worked for me there. Maybe now it's Starbucks or something like that. But find a place where you can hide from everyone. Scheduling appointments with yourself. If you schedule an appointment with a customer or a friend, you typically don't break that, right? You do everything you can to make that appointment. Why not do that for yourself? If the task is important enough, make an appointment for yourself and don't break it. If anybody else wants to intrude on you in that appointment, pretend like you're sitting there with the client. Nobody would bother you if you're sitting there talking with the customer, right? So make appointments with yourself if you really need to. Noise-canceling headphones have been awesome for me. They have given me lots of time that I probably wouldn't ordinarily have. Number one, because they look big, and when people see you having big, giant headphones, they typically think you're not paying attention to them, so you use that to your advantage. And then secondly, I can just pretend I don't hear them and just focus into the computer. So, very good technique. Also, you can put a sign. There's some coworkers that will put a sign that says, "Do not disturb." I don't do that, but some people it works. One of my friends told me about the hacker growl. So that's just basically a mean face. So someone comes and put the hacker growl, and people will learn not to mess with you. And then finally, if you take it to an extreme, you can actually growl, which happened to me before. I went to go talk to my boss, and he was busy, and he just growled. I said, "Okay, I should come back later." So with checklists, there's a whole book about checklists. You may not need to go that far, but checklists are so important. Just think about some of the routines that you have in your life. Maybe you think that you've memorized them by now, but I can guarantee there's going to be 1 or 2 days you're going to forget that one key item. Like myself, when I forgot to bring my belt when I was packing. It's like, damn it, I would just follow the checklist. I'm trying to be smart. So I recommend that you have a daily routines checklist, so you can just get that stuff out your mind. And then later, you can figure out whether or not you even need to be doing some of these things. And then also I recommend weekly routines. I showed you earlier the weekly reviews. That's part of my weekly checklist. But it's things like maybe looking around the house and seeing if there's anything you need to buy. Maybe it's doing backup on your computer. Whatever it may be, put it in a checklist so you don't have to think about it. Because otherwise those things just linger in the back of your mind. And that's no good for your stress levels. Then, of course, you have some monthly ones. And I say anything you're going to do more than once, make a checklist. It's the same principle that we use when we're creating scripts, right? Or we're automating things. Usually, if it's a task that we're going to do more than once, we'll script it out. Think of the same way as a checklist. Because eventually, you may end up automating it. And also, for example, say you're creating some small app or some fix. Creating a checklist is a great way to afterwards then publish a blog post or create a white paper or something like that. Templates, same thing that I told you before about creating projects. I always start with this template and then fill it out. Even better if you can programmatically create these templates so that you get prompts and then you just fill in things and then boom. Just think of it like Ruby on Rails when you're creating a scaffolding, right? So but you're creating scaffolding for different areas in your life. So I use one for new projects, and what I say is perfect that template, but once you feel like the template has everything you need in it, automate it. And automating it could be, being a developer is actually writing some code to automate it, or you can hire somebody to do whatever this thing is that you've had to create a template for. And then, outsourcing, some of the sites that I like, I put up here. I just added Workana in there because they're awesome and they allowed me to speak here. And I visited their offices and they're pretty amazing. It looks like they're doing some awesome stuff. So I would encourage you that if you're in this area, you definitely check them out. Of course, we have Craigslist. The idea is find out what resources are good for you to outsource to, because sometimes it's dependent upon where you live, what area you're in, and your budget. But figure out some ways to outsource, because it'll save you. Think about your time. Think about how much an hour means to you in dollars, and use that as a metric to determine what you should be outsourcing. The 4-Hour Workweek by Tim Ferriss has a really good chapter on that, where he talks about how he outsources almost everything. And I recommend that you check out that book if you get a chance. Finally, a friend he has a company that specifically focuses on outsourcing, and he's collected these tips that I found to be really useful in determining how to outsource software. So if you need to outsource software, I highly recommend you check that out. Hackathons. So unfortunately, I wish we could have had a hackathon connected to this event, but a hackathon is a great way as a developer to polish your skills, find people to work with, challenge yourself, and also, sometimes you end up, hitting the jackpot. There's been several cases where someone wins a hackathon and they go on to create a successful business. But I would say the thing to think about as a hackathon is that it's a method where you can basically upgrade yourself. So I would say that if you're going to go to a hackathon, don't go there and do the same stuff that you're always doing. If you're all PHP veterans, go there and do something in Ruby, do something in Python, expand your mind. Because every time you do that, your problem-solving skills are going to be that much better. And so these are a couple of hackathon sites where you can find some hackathons to attend. So now I'm going to go into the tools section. Now, I'm a Mac user now, so a lot of the tools I'm going to talk about are Mac-based, but there's this site called alternative2.net that you could use to find alternatives to stuff. For example, if you put in Photoshop there, it'll show you that you can be using the GIMP or Paint.net or Pixelmator. So it's a pretty cool tool if there's something that maybe came from Windows and there's this awesome tool and you want to find a replacement on your Mac, this is a way to do that. So first of all, feed reader. Sadly, Google killed Reader, which I don't understand at all. It's one of the most useful things that they did, and they killed it. But fortunately, Feedly is there, and it performs a similar function. And if it wasn't for a feed reader, I'd probably go crazy because I love to read, and there's a countless amount of things to read on the internet. And so the idea is you use the feed reader to kind of filter down into whatever your area of focus is. For example, you might notice that I have a couple of SendGrid feeds here. So the idea is you can use something like Google Alerts and then pull that into a feed and see whenever somebody says something about your company. Now, I don't want those to be happening all throughout the day. I want to see these when I want to see them. So I put them in the feed reader. Also, for example, social news. I like to read Hacker News, but I can spend all day reading Hacker News if I'm not careful. So what I do is I just look at any post that has over 100 plus votes and put that in the feed reader. And that kind of helps my sanity a little bit. There's a wonderful app called Reader that works on the iPhone. It currently broke on the iPad, but it's a great way to consume. If you're using an iPhone, I highly recommend that app. It connects with Feedly and it synchronizes, and it allows you to read all of your articles offline. And like I told you before, like for example with things like Basecamp, you could pull in to the RSS feeds and add that into your feed reader as well. So, coming from an email company, I have to say something about email, other than it's a very painful thing to deal with on a daily basis if you get a lot of emails. So one of the things I've done to help preserve my sanity is aggressively use Gmail filters. There's two things I like about Gmail filters. One is that they exist on the server. So it means any client that I use, those filters are there. So whether or not I'm using my phone, my iPad, whatever it is, those filters work. So the way I look at a filter is if I ever receive an email and that email interrupted me and I shouldn't have saw it right then I create a filter for it. And the filter usually says, don't mark it as read, but put it in my archive folder. And then once a day, you can go to your Gmail search and type label : unread, and it will show you all of your unread mail. And so then once a day, I will check all those unread mails that shouldn't have interrupted me. Sometimes I get behind and it take some time. But as a consequence, now my inbox isn't crazy throughout the day when I'm checking it on my phone. Save you a ton of time. Now if you're a SendGridder, you can use our incoming parse API in order to do some cool stuff with incoming email. So for example, what our incoming parse does is when you receive the email, we parse it out into a JSON package, all the elements of the email, including the attachments. So you can do some really cool automation to your email. Same thing with our event trigger feature. The idea there is you can say, if somebody opens this email or clicks this link, notify me in real time. And then you could do something about it. The example I usually give is, say you're looking for a job, you put your resume behind a link in your email, and then you can programmatically make it so that as soon as they click that link, you get a text message telling you that somebody opened it. And then you can call that person. So before I told you about brainstorming, my favorite tool for brainstorming is a mind map. Ideally, it's nice to have a nice big whiteboard where you can just do that free-form, handwritten, or a paper. But some of the tools I like is MindNote Pro or Xmind are good tools for that, especially because if they're digital mind maps, it's a lot easier to share with others. There's a cloud-based solution called MindMeister that allows you to collaborate on mind maps as well. This tool has probably saved me the most time out of all the tools. Unfortunately, Jing doesn't exist anymore. They now changed to Snagit. Jing used to be free. Basically what it allows you to do is take up to 5-minute screen capture videos. Now how this has saved me a lot of time is when I was doing a lot of QA work and I needed to describe a lot of bugs and a lot of issues and features. I found that it's really a lot easier to define these things just with a screen capture and with your voice versus trying to write it down in bullet points or something like that. It leaves a lot less chance for miscommunication. And then what we would do is when the developer would finish, they would make a screencast describing the code that they changed and describing how the feature works. So that saved a tremendous amount of time for us. And Sketch is a similar tool, except it's just for doing screen captures. Text snippets have also saved me a bunch of time. The idea is, for example, if I'm so lazy, I don't even like to type my phone number. So instead, I will type .p, and then it will expand out my phone number, right? And so where this comes in to be really life-changing is when you use it on your phone. because I don't know about you guys, but I hate typing on the phone, but usually I end up having to type on the phone. So what's cool about something like Text Expander is that it synchronizes across your computers and your phone devices, so that all those snippets that you create are available throughout all your systems. I have to give a shout out to Google Apps. Most businesses that I've started have started with Google Apps. You know, it's a free system for sharing and collaborating amongst your team. I used to use Google Sites for my centralized dashboard, and then the calendar, you know, pretty much syncs with almost everything. It's a very easy thing to work with. And then Google Hangouts was like the real big thing, especially for our team, because a lot of us use Linux, right? And unfortunately, things like Skype sometimes are pretty painful on Linux, especially if you're trying to do video. So Google Hangouts works really well instead. And then Google Talk, you know, when you're doing your IM within Google Talk, it's cool because then when you search, it acts like as if you're searching through your emails. So you can have all that stuff on record. Now, social media, I wanted to talk about this a little bit because for a lot of us, that's a very time-consuming thing. Especially for us as developer relations, because we have to monitor all of these things, and it can get a little crazy. But one of the main things that I find value of social media is the filtered news aspect, because I follow people that I trust, and I make lists of people, like, for example, people who are programmers, people that are iOS, and you know, on and on. That way, if I want to learn something, what's going on in this particular community, I can quickly get that information, and I know that I can trust those sources. Also, you know, it's a great thing for networking. Now, for social bookmarking, I'm not as into social bookmarking anymore, but I still use it as a research tool. Because think of it this way, if you're looking for information and you're trying to determine whether that information is good or not, one of the things that we usually do is we look at the Google PageRank and see, is it like a 1 or 2? It's probably not good. But another thing you can look at is how many other people have bookmarked that site, because it's kind of a, you know, crowd validation. Readers. So if you're like me, you find a lot of times where internet just isn't working right. And so that's a perfect time to read, right? So things like Instapaper, Read It Later, Pocket, these are all great tools for reading stuff later. Not there, though. Just kidding. So also things like Audible and Downcast are very good. Things like podcasts, those things are a really good way to maximize your time when you're doing things like menial chores or taking a walk or something like that. So for notes, when I was in the Microsoft world, OneNote was my collection tool, and I still think it's a really cool tool. But for now, Evernote seems to be the best of breed of all these tools, mainly because it's cross-platform, across everything, and it also has a web-based aspect. And I especially like it when traveling, because I can put all my itinerary and all of my stuff in there and store it offline. So when I'm in a situation like this where I don't have internet, I'm able to still survive. Also, what I like about Evernote is you can put in, like there's a guy who was collecting teas, and what you do is you take pictures of the teas and you put them in Evernote, and then the OCR would automatically pull out the name of the tea, so he didn't have to actually write it down. So it's pretty cool, and you can put any kind of document in there, and it'll make it searchable for you. So storage, I mean, probably all of you are now using Dropbox. Saves your life in a lot of ways, especially if something happens to your computer, your hard drive dies or something like that. But remember, there's other solutions, things like Box and Google Drive, and Microsoft has one. I think it's called SkyDrive. And I think there are some startups now that are trying to make services where you plug in all of your different tools, and then they just show you one interface as like a drive on your machine. I don't think anyone has perfected that yet, but it's something to keep an eye on, because I think that's a pretty cool thing to do, to put all those things together. Let's see, security. So, there's been a lot of talk about security lately, and my contribution to this is, I recommend to use one of these tools. For me, 1Password is one that saves me a lot of time. But the idea is that you don't want to be using the same password over and over again. But I have no super memory. I cannot remember more than one password at a time. So using one of these systems, you're allowed to create a nice, strong password without having to memorize them all. All you have to do is just memorize your master password. So that, as long as you can remember one password, you'll be good. Launcher. So this is one thing that I didn't use for a long time. And finally someone introduced me to Quicksilver, and it just really made my productivity on my machine a lot faster when it comes to opening apps, finding files, doing simple calculations, doing searches, accessing a clipboard. I mean, a launcher, I think, is a really good tool to invest in for all of you that are sitting in front of a computer for a long time. So with meetings, I recommend, again, Google Hangouts. Join.me is good. But also, I wanted an excuse to show bacon, because I really want bacon, and I don't know where to find it here. Maybe somebody can help me. But Open Talk and Toolia I wanted to mention specifically because you're all developers. What those tools allow you to do is to create your own Google Hangout and your own conference calls using the APIs that they provide, which are actually really easy to use. So also, we save some commute time. Now finally, I told you earlier about GTD and how it's like the cornerstone of my system. Well, at the end of the day, you need a place to put all of those tasks, right? I used to recommend people Toodly-Doo, but every time I say it, people laugh at me, so I decided not to recommend it anymore. But it is actually a good tool, but there are some issues with it that don't work for me specifically, but I think it's a good tool. But OmniFocus is really the tool that changed my game in terms of task management, and it's the reason why I've stuck with the Mac, because it's only available on Mac. And I think it's part of their evil plan to make me stuck on a Mac. But that tool has been the best tool out of all of them that I've tried, mainly because of its ability to hide stuff from you. It has this concept of perspectives, where I can say, okay, I'm at work now, just show me the stuff that's related here. Or, I'm at home now, show me the stuff that's related to here. It's a very powerful tool, but you definitely have to invest time and money into it. For sharing, Pivotal Tracker, Assembla, Asana, these are all great tools. You guys may have some local tools here that you use. The idea is to get people to buy in. The biggest problem I've seen always when you have teams is getting people to actually use the tools. So keep that in mind. Make sure you get buy-in from all your team members. All right. I'll just say a quick brief word about hardware. Just make sure that you're using the maximum hardware for your situation. Max out your SSD and RAM. Make sure that you are using your keyboard device and input device properly. When I say keyboard device, something like Keyboard Maestro is a fantastic software that you can add on and make your keyboard much more useful than just by default. And also, the Magic Trackpad for me has saved me a lot of time. I took the time to learn the gestures and even created some of my own custom gestures, and it could save you a bunch of time. And then, as I mentioned before, when you think about your system as a whole, think about, do you live mostly on a tablet or a smartphone, or do you live mostly on a PC? That will help you determine what tools are going to work for you, because a lot of these tools are very good on a certain platform, but they're horrible on another. So I'm going to quickly go, running out of time here, so I'm going to quickly go through the references. You can go to, at the end I'll have a slide share link. You can go there and download these slides, and you can get all of these resources. The idea is I wanted to give you some places to go to continue your reading. ThinkingSerious.com is my own blog. I've tried my best to catalog all of my trials and tribulations so that others don't have to go through my same pain and suffering. Asian Efficiency has some really great stuff about OmniFocus if you decide to go that route, and they generally just have some pretty good tips on a daily basis. The Time Management Ninja is good, Lifehack, Hacker News, D-Zone, and Stack Overflow are all great places to find good productivity stuff. Now, as far as reading, I mentioned to you Getting Things Done by David Allen. Turns out he's written 3 books. He has Ready for Everything, Anything, and Making It All Work. I would recommend that if you're going to read these books, read them in that order. Ready for Anything, I think, was written first, but I think Getting Things Done will help you the most quickly to get your system started now. Then the 18 Minutes, Find Your Focus. Our friends at 37 Signals have written a couple of books that they now give away for free. Very good books to read for both your business and your life. Do the Work and the War of Art by Stephen Pressfield. This will help you with your creative issues and finding that flow time to actually do creative work. This one is a little bit dated, but I still think there's a lot of good stuff in there. It's written by Gina Trapani, and it's a really interesting book about little life hacks that will help you be more productive. If you're going to use OmniFocus, I recommend this book, Creating Flow. It's written by a psychiatrist, and he brings in ideas coming from psychology into task management. So it's a pretty interesting book. And then I recommend that you get a subscription to Safari Bookshelf Online. I think it's like $10 a month. It's kind of like the Netflix of books. You have access to a tremendous library of books, not just Safari, but all sorts of awesome books. And then podcasts, Back to Work. You may have heard of Merlin Mann. He was one of the first champions of this GTD system with his 43 folders blog. Now he has a blog called Kung Fu Grip, which I love the name of. And he has a podcast, Back to Work, that's pretty good. Big web show. If you're a Mac user, definitely recommend you check out Mac Power Users. It's two lawyers that talk about how they specifically use their Macs every day, and then they get people from the community to come and talk about how they use their Macs. And so you always learn something cool. Mixergy, I recommend for anyone who is running a business or is thinking about a business. He has interviewed countless amounts of entrepreneurs, and he talks to them very candidly about what they did right and what they did wrong. Very, very cool podcast. GTD Study Group, if you're going to get into GTD, it's kind of like an informal podcast where there's usually around 6 to 7 people, and they talk about how they're using the system in their day-to-day lives. And then don't forget about iTunes U. There's a tremendous amount of information there. I always forget about it, but there's a whole bunch of great classes there, and it's all for free. So I'm going to leave you with some key takeaways. I told you before that it's very important to focus on outcomes and results. Right? Make sure that every task or project that you're working on, that you've taken the time to define what the specific measurable actions are. Then try to figure out, when am I going to have time to actually do this stuff? Including myself, a lot of us get into this over-planning mode. And we're going to spend all of our time planning, forgetting to actually do the thing. And make sure that you create the time to do that. And then move towards balance. We don't want to be workaholics. We want to share our gifts with other people other than our clients and co-workers. So think about how can you achieve balance. And finally, remember that your system is going to be custom to you. And you're going to need to iterate often in order to make a system that's going to work good in your life. I mean, I've iterated countless times and I'm still not exactly where I want to be. It's a constant process. And be careful about radical jumps from one system to the next, because that's very disruptive. If you're going to make a change, make it in a reasonable format so that you don't mess up the rest of your commitments. So I'm going to give you a quick plug. We're going to stay here until Tuesday. SendGrid is having a event that's free. It's from 2 to 7 at Hotel Madero. If you'd like to join us, SendGridDeliver.com. We're going to have a happy hour afterwards. We'd love to talk to you. Basically, we're going to be talking email, talking about how you can better use email within your applications. So we'd love to see you there. And I'll leave you with this quote. It's very relevant to myself, because I always feel like I could do 2 or 3 things at once, but we actually can't. One thing at a time. So make sure you're doing the right thing. And with that, I thank you very much for your time. And if you have any questions, I'm more than happy. I think you have